Nearly half the world's population, about 47.9%, is actually vitamin D deficient. In Europe, that number climbs even higher, topping 53%. Vitamin D is more than just a hormone. It acts like a master regulator in your body. It influences mood, immune function, muscle strength, inflammation, and it does this at the genetic level. The Women's Health Initiative found that women with vitamin D levels below 12 nanograms per milliliter, which is extremely low, had a 253% increased risk of colon cancer. And in a world where the best medicine sometimes comes from blending evidence with experience, I think this one's worth sharing. Not as a medical recommendation, but as a vignette of how I've personally used vitamin D to improve the health of my family. My name is Dr. Ravi Kumar. I'm a neurosurgeon in search of the causes of human illness and the solutions that help us heal and thrive. I want you to join me on a journey of discovery as I turn over every stone in search of the roots of disease and the mysteries of our resilience. The human body is a mysterious and miraculous machine with an amazing ability to self-heal. Let us question everything and discover our true potentials. Welcome to the Dr. Kumar Discovery. My name is Dr. Ravi Kumar, and welcome to the Dr. Kumar Discovery Podcast. In this podcast, I aim to cut through medical dogma and bias and bring clarity to complex health issues so we can make better decisions about our own health. That's something I've worked hard to do in my own life, and it's something I want to share with you so you can do the same. Today, we're talking about vitamin D. It's one of those things everyone's heard of, but very few people truly understand how vital it is for overall health and longevity. And what makes vitamin D so unique is that it's not just a vitamin. It's also a powerful hormone, deeply involved in the way our bodies function. Most people think of vitamin D as a bone vitamin, the thing that helps us absorb calcium and build strong bones. And that is true, but it's just the beginning. Vitamin D influences the expression of around 1,000 genes. That means it plays a direct role in deciding when and how your body reads its own DNA and what biological instructions to carry out. Vitamin D is a master regulator that is involved in almost every system in our body. Now here's the startling part. Despite vitamin D being a generally well-known micronutrient, nearly half the world's population, about 47.9%, is actually vitamin D deficient. In Europe, that number climbs even higher, topping 53%. And in the United States, more than 1/4 of us have levels that are simply inadequate. Vitamin D deficiency isn't a fringe issue. It's a global epidemic that's silently unfolding right under our noses. And so far, we've barely scratched the surface in addressing it. One of the reasons for this global neglect likely has to do with a fascinating aspect of vitamin D biology, and that is that we actually make it ourselves. When our skin is exposed to sunlight, specifically UVB rays, it produces vitamin D. It's one of the few nutrients we don't have to get solely from food, and that has led to complacency. You see, modern life gets in the way of this vital photosynthetic process. We wear sunscreen, we work indoors, we live in places with long winters or limited sunlight, and that means many of us are cut off from this natural, built-in system of vitamin D production. We lose access to something our bodies were designed to make, something vital and essential. So in this episode, we're going to dig into why vitamin D matters, how it works, how we might be underestimating its importance. My hope is that by the end of this, you'll walk away with a new appreciation for what healthy vitamin D levels look like and how important they are to your health and longevity. Quick disclaimer before we go any further. I'm a medical doctor, but I'm not your doctor. This podcast is for informational purposes only. It's not medical advice and shouldn't be used to diagnose or treat any condition. My goal here is to give you the most honest, unbiased perspective I can so you can take that knowledge, bring it to your own healthcare provider, and figure out the best strategy for your unique health goals. Okay, to kick off this episode, I want to start with a story. It's a personal one, not about my own health, it's about my Pati. Pati means grandmother in Tamil, which is the ancient and beautiful culture my father comes from. 2 years ago, my wife and I moved our 4 children and our dog to India for a year. I had taken time off from my neurosurgical practice in the US to work in mission hospitals and reconnect with my cultural roots. Before we began our journey into the mountains of southern India, our first stop was at my Pati's house in the southern Indian city of Chennai. My Pati is in her 90s, but you'd never guess it. She has always been vibrant, joyful, energetic, and incredibly sharp. But this time, something was different. She was subdued. She barely smiled. Her energy was low, and she didn't want to move around much. When she did walk, it was slow and labored. It was striking. My first thought was, oh no, my pati has entered cognitive decline. That would have been the easy explanation, and honestly, it was the one her doctor had already assumed. But something didn't sit right with me. I wanted to look deeper. I asked to see her labs just to check if there were any deficiencies we could correct, and the first thing that jumped out at me was her vitamin D level. It was 8 nanograms per milliliter. To put that in perspective, a normal level is at least 30 nanograms per milliliter. She was profoundly deficient, and yet her doctor hadn't recommended any supplementation. Now, my pati had grown up in a rural village, rarely needing medicine. Food and prayer was her only treatment for most of the things that she went through in life, and she was very proud of that. So she was reluctant to take any kind of pills, even vitamins. But I insisted. I started her on a high-dose vitamin D replenishment protocol, followed by a maintenance dose. And here's what's interesting. She lives in Chennai in southern India, just 10 degrees north of the equator. There's abundant sunlight. But despite that, between her darker skin, her advanced age, and the fact that she spent most of her time indoors, she wasn't making enough vitamin D. She had constant muscle pain, low energy, poor sleep, and a completely flat mood. These are classic signs of vitamin D deficiency, yet they were being chalked up to aging. After getting her started on treatment, I left with my family to begin our year in the mountains. 2 months later, I came back to visit her. I couldn't believe what I saw. She was herself again, lively, quick-witted, moving around the house with ease. The muscle pain was gone. Her spark had returned. It was such a dramatic transformation, and it made me wonder how many other grandmothers and grandfathers are suffering in silence, misdiagnosed with age-related decline, when really they're just profoundly deficient in something we can correct. Vitamin D deficiency had been sapping my pati's vitality right under the radar, and correcting it gave her life back. Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying this episode so far. I want to ask you for a quick favor. If you wouldn't mind, please leave a comment on whatever platform you're listening to this on, and please share this podcast with your friends and family. This will make a huge difference in the reach and impact of this podcast. This journey of discovery that I'm on is a journey I want to take with as many people as possible, and I'm completely reliant on a partnership with you to make that happen. So thank you for joining me, and let's make this happen. Vitamin D deficiency is something that likely didn't exist, at least in any significant way, throughout most of human history. It really only began to emerge with the onset of the Industrial Revolution about 350 years ago. Before that, humans lived out in the open, hunting, gathering, farming, walking, working, spending most of their lives in the sun. Sunlight was simply a part of life. And what's fascinating is that our bodies are biologically designed to turn that sunlight into vitamin D. Here's how it works. There's a substance in the skin called 7-dehydrocholesterol, which is a precursor in the same pathway the body uses to make cholesterol. It tends to accumulate in the skin. When ultraviolet B rays, UVB, hit the skin, they interact with 7-dehydrocholesterol and start a process called photoconversion. This is a non-enzymatic reaction, meaning no enzymes are required. Light alone initiates the transformation. That photoconversion turns 7-dehydrocholesterol into pre-vitamin D3, which then thermally converts into vitamin D3 with the help of body heat. This is also called cholecalciferol at this point. It's a natural, ongoing process, one that relies entirely on regular exposure to sunlight. Now remember, cholesterol itself is produced in every cell of the body. It's vital to cellular function and integrity. And vitamin D production is literally baked into that pathway, anchored in the skin and ready to be activated by light. But when the Industrial Revolution hit, something changed. People were pulled out of rural life and into factories, where they began working long hours in crowded, polluted cities. In places like London and Manchester, coal-burning factories filled the skies with thick smoke, blocking the sunlight. Combine that with poor housing conditions and little time spent outside, and you had a recipe for widespread vitamin D deficiency. And the ones who suffered the most were the children. Vitamin D is essential not only for absorbing calcium and phosphorus from the gut, but also for bone remodeling, a process that's especially critical during growth. Children's bones are constantly being broken down and rebuilt, reshaped and lengthened. Without vitamin D, that process breaks down. The result was a disease called rickets, a condition where the bones became soft, demineralized, and deformed. The long bones, like the femur and the tibia, would begin to bow under the weight of the body. In fact, the word rickets comes from the Anglo-Saxon word ricken, meaning to twist. Rickets was recognized as early as 1632. It was described as a disease of poor bone mineralization in growing children. And it wasn't just cosmetic. Women who had been vitamin D deficient during childhood often grew up with deformed pelvises, leading to complications and even death during childbirth. You might even remember Tiny Tim from A Christmas Carol, the young, disabled boy in the book. He was a vignette of a little boy with rickets, living in the fog and soot of 19th century London, too weak to walk properly because his bones hadn't mineralized. The condition of rickets became so common in Britain that it was sometimes referred to as the English disease. But it wasn't limited to the UK. Rickets appeared in crowded cities across the world, including places like Chicago, where smog and poor living conditions meant children didn't get enough sunlight. In the 1890s, a medical missionary named T.A. Palm made a simple but brilliant observation. He noticed that children exposed to sunlight, both in his work across the UK and in China, seemed to recover from rickets. That set off a wave of research into sun therapy. Doctors began using sunlight and later ultraviolet light from mercury lamps as a treatment for children with rickets. In the early 20th century, a researcher named Sir Edward Mellanby in the UK theorized that rickets might also stem from a dietary deficiency. He was able to produce rickets in beagles, then cure it by feeding them cod liver oil. Cod liver oil is rich in fat-soluble vitamins, especially vitamin A and, crucially, vitamin D. From that point on, it became the go-to treatment for children with rickets. Eventually, in the 1920s, a German researcher named Adolf Windaus succeeded in characterizing vitamin D2 and vitamin D3 and went on to win the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1928 for his work. Vitamin D supplements come in two main forms: vitamin D2, also called ergocalciferol, and vitamin D3, called cholecalciferol. Vitamin D2 is made by fungi when they're exposed to UV light. Vitamin D3, on the other hand, is what animals, including us, naturally produce. Once formed, vitamin D3 enters the bloodstream, where it binds to a transport protein called vitamin D binding protein. This complex circulates through the body and makes its first stop in the liver. There, it's converted into 25-hydroxyvitamin D, also known as calcidiol. This is the form that's typically measured on your lab tests. If you ask your doctor to check your vitamin D level, they're looking at this 25-hydroxy form. Think of it as the storage form of vitamin D. This is your body's reserve of the vitamin. From there, 25-hydroxyvitamin D travels to the kidneys, where it can be converted to 1,25-dihydroxyvitamin D, also called calcitriol, which is the active form that has the most biological activity. This conversion primarily happens in the kidneys, but it can also occur within other tissues and cells that need vitamin D on demand. Now, this active form of vitamin D is more than just a hormone. It acts like a master regulator in your body. It influences mood, immune function, muscle strength, inflammation, glucose metabolism, insulin sensitivity, detoxification, and antioxidant defenses. And it does this at the genetic level. Here's how. The active form of vitamin D enters the cells and binds to a protein called vitamin D receptor. Once activated, this receptor pairs with another protein called retinoid X receptor. Together, they form a unit called a heterodimer. That travels into the nucleus of the cell where your DNA resides. Inside the nucleus, this vitamin D receptor complex binds to specific regions of DNA and activates genes, prompting them to produce RNA, which is then translated into proteins, the tools your body uses to carry out its functions. In total, vitamin D directly or indirectly influences the expression of 3 to 5% of the human genome. That's over 1,000 genes. That gives you a sense of how foundational it is, and it helps explain why low vitamin D can have such wide-ranging consequences across your body. So let's talk about what vitamin D deficiency actually looks like and how it affects your body. Most people, when they think about vitamin D, immediately think about calcium and bone health, and that's for a good reason. In the setting of low vitamin D, your gut's ability to absorb calcium drops dramatically. Only about 10 to 15% of the calcium you eat gets absorbed. Phosphorus, another key mineral for bone strength, drops to about 60% absorption. When you replenish vitamin D, your calcium absorption can triple. That alone gives you a sense of how crucial it is for bone metabolism and mineral absorption. Now, when vitamin D deficiency becomes prolonged, the bones begin to lose their mineral content. This deficiency also impairs the activity of osteoclasts and osteoblasts, the cells responsible for bone resorption and remodeling, and this disrupts the normal cycle of bone maintenance. In children, the end result is rickets, while in adults, it leads to a disease called osteomalacia, a condition that literally means soft bones. Osteomalacia and osteoporosis are often confused, but they're not the same. Osteomalacia is typically caused by a deficiency in vitamin D. It's often accompanied by bone pain and muscle aches. something many patients report as vague, deep aching discomfort. It's one of the hallmark symptoms of vitamin D deficiency in adults. Osteoporosis, on the other hand, is more about the gradual thinning of bones, most commonly seen in the elderly. And here's where things get interesting. For a long time, researchers wondered if vitamin D deficiency might be a primary cause of osteoporosis, particularly in menopausal women. But when that theory was tested in large clinical trials, the results weren't all that impressive. Take the Women's Health Initiative, for example. It was one of the largest studies of its kind, following over 36,000 postmenopausal women aged 50 to 79. The women were given either 1 gram of calcium carbonate and 400 IU of vitamin D3 or a placebo. And while they did find some reductions in fractures, the differences weren't statistically significant. On the flip side, there was a 17% increase in kidney stones in the women taking calcium. That was statistically significant. Another trial called the RECORD trial followed 5,000 older adults, most of them women. They were split into 4 groups. One got vitamin D, one got calcium, one got both, and one got nothing. The result? No meaningful difference in new fractures, hip fractures, falls, quality of life, or even overall mortality across any of the groups. So what does that mean? Well, it means that even though vitamin D is absolutely essential, its impact on preventing osteoporotic fractures may not be as powerful as we once thought, at least not on its own. And that makes sense when you realize how multifactorial bone health really is. For example, in postmenopausal women, estrogen deficiency is a major driver of bone loss. And while hormone replacement therapy fell out of favor for a while, a reevaluation of the evidence suggests it may be safer to be on than not for postmenopausal women, something I'll explore in a future episode. Another key player is vitamin K2, which we'll be talking about in the next episode. K2 is crucial for directing calcium into bones and keeping it out of your arteries and other soft tissues. It works hand in hand with vitamin D and may be the missing link in supporting long-term bone health. Another crucial role of vitamin D is in muscle strength, something that becomes especially important as we age. In elderly individuals, sarcopenia, the gradual loss of muscle mass, can lead to instability, weakness, and falls. But studies have shown that muscle strength improves significantly with vitamin D supplementation. One study looked at 124 nursing home residents who were given varying doses of vitamin D or a placebo for about 5 months. The results were striking. Those who received vitamin D had a 72% lower adjusted risk of falls compared to those on placebo. This reminds me of the story I told you about my Pati. Not only was she suffering from bone pain due to a severe vitamin D deficiency, but she had grown profoundly weak. Walking was difficult, and yet once she started supplementing, her strength returned, and with it, her vitality blossomed. Vitamin D also plays a major role in cancer prevention. People living at lower latitudes closer to the equator with more year-round sun exposure tend to have higher vitamin D levels and significantly lower rates of various cancers, including Hodgkin's lymphoma, colon cancer, pancreatic cancer, prostate cancer, ovarian cancer, and breast cancer. Multiple studies, both prospective and retrospective, show that individuals with vitamin D levels below 20 nanograms per milliliter, a level considered deficient, have a 30 to 50% increased risk of developing colon, breast, or prostate cancer, and a higher mortality rate if they do develop those cancers. The Nurses' Health Study, which followed over 32,000 women, found that those with vitamin D levels around 40 nanograms per milliliter had a 47% lower risk of colorectal cancer compared to those with vitamin D levels of just 16.2 nanograms per milliliter. The Women's Health Initiative found that women with vitamin D levels below 12 nanograms per milliliter, which is extremely low, had a 253% increased risk of colon cancer over the course of 8 years. So how does vitamin D help fight cancer? It acts as a master regulator of cell growth. When cells begin to divide out of control, a hallmark of cancer, vitamin D can signal them to undergo apoptosis or programmed cell death, quenching the fire before it begins. It also inhibits angiogenesis, the formation of new blood vessels that tumors need to grow. Now let's talk about autoimmune diseases, another area where vitamin D appears to play a protective role. People who grow up at higher latitudes, further from the equator with less sun exposure, are at increased risk of autoimmune conditions like type 1 diabetes, multiple sclerosis, and Crohn's disease. Living below 35 degrees latitude, which is the parallel that runs through places like North Carolina and southern Italy, for the first 10 years of life, cuts the risk of developing multiple sclerosis in half. And for every 20 nanograms per milliliter increase in vitamin D levels that a person has, the risk of MS drops by another 41%. Type 1 diabetes, an autoimmune condition in which the immune system destroys insulin-producing cells in the pancreas, is also influenced by vitamin D. In children with low vitamin D levels, the risk of developing type 1 diabetes was found to be 200% higher. A large Finnish study set out to test this by giving 2,000 IUs of vitamin D daily to over 10,000 infants during their first year of life. And then they followed them for 31 years. Researchers found an 80% reduction in type 1 diabetes risk in those who received the supplementation. Vitamin D also appears to protect the heart. Simply living at a higher latitude is a risk factor for hypertension and cardiovascular disease, likely due to lower vitamin D synthesis. In one study, patients with high blood pressure were exposed to UVB light 3 times a week for 3 months. Their vitamin D levels rose by 180%. And their blood pressure normalized. Another critical area is metabolism. Vitamin D fine-tunes insulin secretion by binding to receptors on pancreatic beta cells and enhances insulin sensitivity in muscle and fat tissue, allowing glucose to enter cells more efficiently. When vitamin D levels drop, insulin signaling is disrupted, leading to a metabolic shift, higher triglycerides, and lower HDL. As we discussed in the last episode, a high triglyceride to HDL ratio is one of the hallmarks of metabolic syndrome. Observational studies consistently show that low vitamin D levels are linked to a higher risk of type 2 diabetes and metabolic syndrome. And just like the body, the brain is full of vitamin D receptors. Vitamin D influences the production of neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine. It regulates calcium signaling and supports neuroplasticity. That's the brain's ability to grow and adapt. When vitamin D is low, studies show increased brain inflammation, impaired neural connections, faster cognitive decline, and a higher risk of Alzheimer's and dementia. It's also tied to mood disturbances. People with low levels often feel emotionally flat, depressed, withdrawn. But the good news is that it is often reversible with proper supplementation. Vitamin D also plays a role in mitochondrial function. You might remember from the last episode that mitochondria are those little power plants inside our cells. They produce the energy we need to function. Vitamin D stimulates mitochondrial biogenesis, meaning it helps create more mitochondria and enhances their energy-producing efficiency. People with vitamin D deficiency often have reduced resting energy expenditure and impaired mitochondrial function in muscle. But when they supplement, mitochondrial activity improves and energy balance is restored. Lastly, vitamin D enhances innate immunity by upregulating pattern recognition receptors and antimicrobial peptides. This strengthens the body's first line of defense against pathogens. Later in this podcast, we'll delve into a practical strategy using this quality of vitamin D that has helped me and my family significantly. So what's the right level of vitamin D to keep us in a healthy and optimal state, where vitamin D can efficiently perform all these essential functions we've just spoken about? According to the Endocrine Society, a deficiency is defined as having less than 20 nanograms per milliliter, and if you're in Europe or another part of the world, that's around 50 nanomoles per liter. Levels between 21 and 29 nanograms per milliliter are considered insufficient. Once you're above 30 nanograms per milliliter, or around 75 nanomoles per liter, you're considered in the sufficiency range, where you have enough vitamin D. And they mark the threshold for potential toxicity at above 100 nanograms per milliliter, or 250 nanomoles per liter. Now, just a quick note about vitamin D toxicity, because this concern often comes up. True vitamin D intoxication is extremely rare. When it does happen, it usually presents as nausea, dehydration, and lethargy, and it's often misdiagnosed as something like a stomach bug. But here's the thing. You'd have to take a massive dose of vitamin D over a long period of time for this to occur. Based on conservative data, you'd need to take around 40,000 IUs of vitamin D2 every day for several months to even begin approaching toxicity. And in some case studies, individuals were taking over 1 million IUs daily for months before developing symptoms. When toxicity does occur, it almost is always due to elevated calcium levels in the blood, what we call hypercalcemia. While the Endocrine Society flags levels above 100 nanograms per milliliter as a concern, studies show that symptoms don't actually appear until levels are well above 200, or closer to 214 nanograms per milliliter in the US. 535 nanomoles per liter in Europe. So those are the official guidelines. But here's how I like to think about this. If we really want to understand what's optimal, we should look at people living traditional lifestyles, populations that haven't been swept up in the modern world. No processed food, no sunscreen, no 9 to 5 jobs indoors. Just human beings living the way we were evolutionarily designed to live. 3 notable populations have been studied in this regard: the Maasai, the Hadzabe, and the Hadza, all from East Africa. These are pastoralists and hunter-gatherer populations living outdoors, getting regular sun exposure, and not taking any supplements. Their average vitamin D levels are around 44 to 46 nanograms per milliliter, which translates to about 110 to 115 nanomoles per liter. That gives us a natural benchmark. When we strip away the layers of modern life, like chronic stress, inflammation, pollution, sedentary behavior, this is where our vitamin D levels tend to land. And importantly, that range 44 to 46 nanograms per milliliter is still well within the Endocrine Society's definition of sufficient. So here's the takeaway. Your vitamin D level should never drop below 30 nanograms per milliliter or 75 nanomoles per liter. But if you're aiming for optimal, that sweet spot seems to be around 44 to 46 nanograms per milliliter, or 110 to 115 nanomoles per liter if you're in Europe or another part of the world. The big question then becomes, how do we keep ourselves in that range so all these metabolic, immune, and anti-cancer functions stay in balance, and we maintain a healthy state of vitamin D homeostasis? Fortunately, vitamin D supplementation is affordable, accessible, and easy. It's available over the counter in small, easy to swallow capsules, and for most people, it's a simple way to correct a deficiency or maintain optimal levels. Now, the question of how much to take isn't a one-size-fits-all strategy. It really depends on the individual, and to get it right, you'll probably need to do a little bit of lab testing to see where your current levels are. But let me give you a baseline. A person who spends a full day in the sun can produce around 10,000 IU of vitamin D naturally. So if our bodies are capable of generating that amount through sun exposure, it stands to reason that this is a safe upper limit, at least from an evolutionary standpoint. And the research supports this. There's no evidence of toxicity at daily doses of 10,000 IU of vitamin D3. None. That's a useful number to keep in mind because while the Food and Nutrition Board, also known as the FNB, sets the official upper limit at 2,000 IUs per day, that guideline is overly conservative. In clinical practice, especially when someone is deficient, most doctors are comfortable prescribing significantly higher doses to restore adequate levels. So again, 10,000 IUs per day can be considered a safe upper limit, but that doesn't mean you need that much. For most adults, the appropriate daily dose falls somewhere between 2,000 and 5,000 IUs per day. For children over the age of 1, the range is usually around 1,000 IUs to 2,000 IUs daily. But the right dose for you depends on a few factors: your body size, how much body fat you carry, your baseline sun exposure, and most importantly, your current 25-hydroxy vitamin D level, which is what your doctor will check on a lab. You want your 25-hydroxy vitamin D level to land around 45 nanograms per milliliter, or around 110 to 115 nanomoles per liter if you're using European units. That's where all vitamin D's health benefits, immune regulation, metabolic function, cognitive support really shine. Getting to that level may take a little bit of trial and error, and assuming your level is fine without checking could be a big mistake. Let me share a quick personal story. When I was living in Hawaii, I was outside a lot, surfing, staying active. I thought for sure my vitamin D level would be great, but it was winter, and I'm dark-skinned, and even though Hawaii sits at around 22 degrees latitude, the sun gets pretty low that time of year. I started feeling unusually tired, low energy, and a bit mentally foggy. I asked my doctor to check my vitamin D level. He brushed it off and said, no one gets vitamin D deficiency in Hawaii, but I insisted. And sure enough, when we checked it, my level came back at 20 nanograms per milliliter, barely above the deficiency cutoff. So why was I vitamin D deficient? Even though I was getting sun almost every day. At the time, I was very sick. It was the lowest point in my health in my lifetime. I was overweight, inflamed, and metabolically off track. That's a story I'll share another time, but the key message here is that systemic inflammation can impair the liver's ability to activate vitamin D. Here's how it works. When sunlight hits your skin, it converts 7-dehydrocholesterol into vitamin D3, also known as cholecalciferol. But that's just the first step. For it to be useful in the body, it needs to be hydroxylated by enzymes in the liver into the form called 25-hydroxy vitamin D, the main circulating form we measure to assess vitamin D status. In my case, even though I was making plenty of D3 from sun exposure, I was inflamed and my liver wasn't converting it efficiently. Without that crucial step, I was functionally deficient. This pattern is likely common in people with obesity, metabolic syndrome, and diabetes. conditions marked by chronic systemic inflammation. They might be getting adequate sun and making D3, but their liver can't keep up. In these cases, supplementation is absolutely necessary, at least until inflammation is brought under control and the body's natural processing pathways are restored. I started supplementing and my energy bounced back almost immediately. So if your level is anywhere around or below 30 nanograms per milliliter, you should supplement with vitamin D3. Aim for that 45 nanograms per milliliter target. It could make a real difference in how you feel, both physically and mentally. Now, I do want to talk about something that steps outside the realm of rigorous scientific experimentation and into the world of anecdotal evidence. You know, I always try to stick to strong evidence-based medicine, but sometimes we have to pay attention to our own experiences. I call these N of 1 clinical trials. In research, N stands for the number of participants in a study. The higher the N, the more robust the trial. But when you do an experiment on yourself, you're running an N of 1 trial. Sure, it doesn't carry the scientific weight of randomized controlled trials, but it can still be incredibly insightful. And when we as a community start sharing these experiences without fear of judgment or being dismissed for lacking evidence, we start building a body of practical wisdom that can help us all get healthier, feel better, and live more in tune with our bodies. So here's one of those experiences, something I discovered by accident, but now has become a staple of medical intervention in my household. One winter, life got busy. We had been traveling and we missed our flu shots. Usually we're pretty diligent about it, especially me being a healthcare worker. But that year, it slipped through the cracks. And right about that time, we got a notice from my son's school. The flu was spreading fast. If we hadn't gotten our flu shots, they highly recommended doing it as soon as possible. That very night, my son came down with something. High fever, 103 degrees Fahrenheit, lethargy, achy, clearly unwell. It looked like the flu was taking hold. I got online and started combing through the literature. If we missed the shot, what else could we do? That's when I came across something called the vitamin D hammer. It was coined by a group of family practitioners, and it was simple. At the first signs of flu-like symptoms, they would give patients a one-time dose of 50,000 IU of vitamin D3, along with vitamin C and some zinc. They were seeing dramatic results. Symptoms resolved within 48 to 72 hours. So I thought, okay, I know enough about vitamin D to feel comfortable trying this. A one-time dose of 50,000 IU is well below any known toxicity threshold, especially in the short term. So I gave my son 50,000 IU of vitamin D3, 500 milligrams of vitamin C, and 25 milligrams of zinc gluconate. He went to bed feeling awful, but by the next morning, he woke up without a single symptom, completely better. I was blown away. Over the following days, the rest of us started coming down with similar flu-like symptoms, one by one. And each time, we broke out the vitamin D hammer. Each of us took 50,000 IU of vitamin D3 with a little vitamin C and some zinc. And again, each time, symptoms either disappeared or were drastically reduced within a day or two. Now, this isn't just some fringe idea. High-dose vitamin D has been studied extensively. One study gave preschoolers 100,000 IU of vitamin D twice, once in the fall and once in the winter, and saw a reduction in viral-induced asthma attacks. So this idea of using large periodic doses of vitamin D to modulate immune function isn't totally new and has been tried legitimately in very little children. Since that first experience, the vitamin D hammer has become a go-to tool in our household. Anytime a virus starts to creep in, sniffles, chills, fatigue, we go straight for it. And time after time, it's helped reduce the severity and duration of whatever bug is going around. And again, it's an N of 1 trial, but it's one we've repeated many times and with consistent results. And in a world where the best medicine sometimes comes from blending evidence with experience, I think this one's worth sharing, not as a medical recommendation, but as a vignette of how I've personally used vitamin D to improve the health of my family. Now, before we wrap up, I want to make sure I don't leave out something that's just as important as supplementation, and that is sunlight. Regular exposure to natural sunlight is critical to our overall well-being, not just for vitamin D production, but for our neurological and physiological health as a whole. Even though we don't photosynthesize like plants, we are solar beings. We thrive when exposed to sunshine. Sunlight boosts our mood, enhances our energy, and helps regulate our circadian rhythms. Our hormones and neurotransmitters rise and fall in tune with the revolution of our planet. Morning light, in particular, plays a powerful role in resetting that internal clock. When you get outside early in the day, even if it's cloudy, you're syncing yourself with the natural rhythm of the earth. And that can improve your sleep, your mental clarity, and your overall health. At a minimum, aim for 15 to 30 minutes of sun exposure 2 or 3 times a week. That alone can help your body produce roughly 1,000 IUs of vitamin D daily. But beyond just numbers, I recommend simply stepping outside in the morning, letting the light hit your face, get it in your eyes, and let your body's natural biochemistry work its magic. Keep the blinds open during the day, and at night, try to reduce artificial light exposure so your body can rest in harmony with nature's rhythm. I hope this episode has given you a deeper understanding of just how essential vitamin D is, how it supports bone health, immune function, metabolism, mood, and even mitochondrial energy production, and how critical it is to know your levels and aim for that sweet spot we talked about. But before I sign off, there's one more thing I want to mention. Vitamin D doesn't work alone. There's another nutrient that plays a crucial role in guiding calcium into the bones and keeping it out of the soft tissues where it doesn't belong. Without this companion nutrient, vitamin D's benefits can fall short, especially when it comes to bone health. It's likely the one reason that vitamin D studies have failed to show results for things like osteoporosis. That nutrient is vitamin K2, and it's a fascinating little molecule. In the next episode, we'll dive into why vitamin D and vitamin K2 need to be taken together and how this duo might be the key to unlocking even greater health. Thanks again for joining me on this journey of discovery. I'm so glad you're here. Cheers, and I'll see you next time.